An older black man, his face a roadmap of quiet dignity, sat in the cramped space of a coach-class seat. His clothes were simple, clean but unremarkable, a stark contrast to the crisp, sterile environment of the aircraft cabin. All he wanted was a sip of water. He pressed the call button, a small blue light illuminating above his head, and waited patiently. A flight attendant, her name tag reading Sabrina, approached with a brisk, impatient stride. Her lipstick was a slash of crimson, and her eyes held a look of bored superiority. He asked, his voice soft and polite, for a small bottle of water. Sabrina's smile, thin and brittle, did not reach her eyes. She looked down her nose at him, her gaze flicking over his worn sneakers and simple trousers. Then, in a voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, she delivered the blow. "Sir, this isn't your private jet." The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. "Sit down and stop acting so entitled." A ripple of shock and discomfort spread through the nearby passengers. A few people exchanged uneasy glances. A man in a business suit smirked, a brief, fleeting show of amusement at the public takedown. The older man, the target of her scorn, did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply lowered his eyes, a mask of calm descending over his features, and said, "Thank you anyway." What no one on that plane knew, what Sabrina in her petty tyranny could never have imagined, was that the quiet man in seat 24B didn't need a private jet. He already owned a whole fleet of them. In fact, he owned the very plane they were all sitting in. He was Preston Cole, the founder and owner of Ascend Air, and with a single silent phone call he was about to make, the captain of this flight would do the unthinkable. He would turn the entire plane around, right in the middle of the sky. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The hum of the engines was a constant, monotonous drone at 37,000 feet, a sound that usually lulled passengers into a state of disconnected peace. But on Ascend Air Flight 7061, the atmosphere in the coach cabin was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with turbulence. The echo of Sabrina's insult still seemed to vibrate in the recycled air, a stain on the otherwise unremarkable journey from Atlanta to Denver. Preston Cole sat by the window, not watching the endless expanse of clouds, but looking inward. He replayed the moment in his mind, not with anger, but with a surgeon's dispassionate analysis. He had wanted to see his company from the ground up, or in this case from the sky down. He had wanted to experience what the average person experiences. The experiment, it seemed, was already yielding powerful and deeply disappointing results. His request had been simple, almost apologetic. He had waited for the flight attendants to finish their main beverage service, not wanting to be a bother. He had pressed the call button once, and waited. When Sabrina arrived, her posture was already a declaration of war. Her shoulders were back, her chin was high, and her eyes scanned him not as a customer to be served, but as a problem to be managed. "Yes," she had clipped, the single word carrying a universe of impatience. "Excuse me," Preston had said, his voice even. "May I please have a bottle of water when you have a moment?" It was the "when you have a moment" that seemed to break something in her. It was the politeness, the deference, that she interpreted as weakness, an invitation for contempt. She saw his simple, unbranded polo shirt, the faint wear on the collar. She saw his sneakers, comfortable and broken in, not the polished leather of the first-class cabin she revered. In her mind, a swift and brutal calculation was made. This man was nobody. He was not important. Therefore, his request was an imposition. His politeness was an act. He was, in her twisted worldview, entitled. And so she had unleashed her verdict upon him. "Sir, this isn't your private jet. Sit down and stop acting entitled." The passengers nearby had reacted in a symphony of silent ways. A young woman in the row across from him flinched, her eyes wide with second-hand embarrassment. She quickly buried her face in a book, but she wasn't reading. The man in the suit who had smirked, a sales executive who prided himself on reading people, saw only what Sabrina wanted him to see, a lower-status individual being put in his place by a figure of authority. He felt a small secret thrill of agreement. A mother with two small children pulled her son a little closer, as if to shield him from the sheer ugliness of the interaction. Preston simply absorbed it. Years of navigating boardrooms filled with hidden agendas and corporate predators had taught him the art of the placid exterior. Anger was a luxury. Reaction was a concession of power. He had simply let the insult wash over him, offering a quiet "thank you anyway" that seemed to confuse Sabrina more than any argument would have. It was a checkmate she didn't even understand was being played. She scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision, and turned on her heel, muttering to her colleague as she walked away. Always something with these people. Now, the silence in the cabin was a living thing. Preston felt the stares, the lingering curiosity. He was no longer an anonymous passenger. He was a spectacle, the man who had been publicly shamed. Yet, within him, there was no shame. There was only a profound and growing sadness, followed by a cold, clear resolve. This was not about a bottle of water. This was about a culture, a rot, and it was his job to cut it out. Watching the entire scene unfold from the galley was Miles Everett. At 24, he was on his third official flight as a junior attendant, still filled with a textbook sense of purpose and a genuine desire to help people. He had seen Sabrina's short temper with other crew members during training, but this was different. This was cruelty for sport. He felt a knot of something hot and uncomfortable twist in his stomach. He saw Preston Cole, not as a victim, but as a man of immense control. The way he had just lowered his eyes, refusing to engage, refusing to give Sabrina the satisfaction of a fight, it was a display of strength Miles had never seen before. He looked at his senior colleague parading her petty victory as she restocked a beverage cart, and he felt a wave of professional shame. This wasn't what he had signed up for. This wasn't. The tension in the air was a question, and Miles was already beginning to feel that he would be forced to answer it. A short while later, after Sabrina had made a show of attending to the front of the cabin, Miles saw his chance. He poured a cup of water, his hands steady despite the slight tremor of nerves he felt, and walked down the aisle to row 2. He leaned in, keeping his voice low and respectful, a stark contrast to Sabrina's public broadcast. "Sir," he murmured, offering the cup. "I saw what happened. I'm very sorry. Can I get this for you?" Preston looked up, and for the first time Miles saw the man's eyes clearly. They were not filled with humiliation or anger. They were sharp, intelligent, and deeply perceptive. A slow, genuine smile formed on Preston's lips, a small act of grace that seemed to light up his entire face. "Thank you, young man. I appreciate that more than you know." He accepted the cup, but did not drink from it immediately. Miles lingered for a moment, his sense of justice overriding his fear of being seen by Sabrina. "That wasn't right, sir," he whispered, feeling a sudden, urgent need to have his dissent registered. "Her behavior was unprofessional. You should file a complaint. I'd be willing to be a witness for you." Preston held his gaze, a thoughtful expression on his face. He seemed to be evaluating Miles, looking past the crisp uniform and into the young man's character. He saw the earnestness, the conflict, the raw integrity. It was a heartening sight. "Thank you, son," Preston said, his voice still quiet but carrying a new weight. He handed the untouched cup of water back to Miles. "I don't think a complaint will be necessary." He paused, letting the silence stretch, before adding a sentence that would echo in Miles's mind for the rest of his life. "Some lessons teach themselves." Miles nodded, not fully understanding the depth of the statement, but recognizing its finality. He retreated to the galley, his mind racing. Meanwhile, Sabrina was there, basking in the glow of her perceived triumph. She was regaling another flight attendant, a woman who seemed to hang on her every word, with a dramatized version of the event. "So I just looked him dead in the eye," Sabrina said, her voice full of theatrical bravado. "And I told him this wasn't his private plane. You should have seen his face." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "He shut up real quick after that. That's how you handle them. You have to put that kind of guy in his place, or they'll walk all over you." "He probably thinks he's so important," she added, grabbing a can of soda and popping the top with a flourish. "Probably saved up for a year just for this ticket." Miles stood silently, arranging plastic cups, his back to them. Every word was a small, sharp jab at his own conscience. He felt implicated by his silence, by his uniform. He knew this was a defining moment. He could either become like them, jaded and cruel, or he could hold on to the principles that had led him to this job, in the first place. He risked another glance down the aisle at the man in. Preston Cole was no longer looking inward. He had his phone in his hand, the screen casting a pale blue light on his face. His expression was serene, almost meditative. With a calm, deliberate motion of his thumb, he typed a short, simple message. There was no anger in the words, no emotion at all. It was a purely logistical command, the kind a general might send from a command tent far from the battlefield. The message read, "Need full log on Flight 76 and also what is the earliest possible ETA for a diversion?" He pressed send. The message icon showed it had been delivered. For a long moment, there was no reply. The three small dots that would indicate someone was typing did not appear. Out the window, the sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. On the ground, somewhere in a sleek, glass-walled building, a machine had just been switched on. The wheels were in motion, silent and inexorable, and Sabrina Knox was flying straight into the storm of their turning. 24 hours earlier, the world had looked very different for Preston Cole. He wasn't in a cramped coach seat, but in a sprawling corner office on the 50th floor of the Ascend Tower. The city of Atlanta spread out below him like a circuit board, a complex network of lights and motion that he, in many ways, helped to command. The office was a testament to minimalist power. A single massive desk of polished mahogany, two simple but elegant chairs for visitors, and a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a god's-eye view of the world. There were no boastful photos, no trophies, just the quiet hum of a perfectly controlled environment. He was speaking with his executive assistant, Lena, a woman whose efficiency and loyalty were as sharp and clean as the lines of the office furniture. She stood before him, holding a tablet displaying the latest quarterly reports. The numbers were good. Profits were up. On paper, Ascend Air was soaring, but Preston was looking at a different set of data, a set that troubled him far more than any balance sheet. "The complaints," he said, his voice a low rumble that filled the quiet room. "They're up 17% this quarter. That's the third quarter in a row." He tapped a finger on his desk, a slow, rhythmic beat. "And look at the language they use, Lena. Dismissive, arrogant, treated like I was an inconvenience. This isn't about lost luggage or delayed flights. This is about dignity." Lena nodded, her expression serious. "The internal surveys show a decline in frontline morale as well. There seems to be a growing disconnect between management's values and the on-the-ground reality." Preston rose from his chair and walked to window, his hands clasped behind his back. He had built Ascend Air from nothing. He'd started with 2 leased planes and a powerful, simple idea that air travel didn't have to be a miserable experience for those who couldn't afford a first-class ticket. He believed that respect wasn't a luxury item. It was the very foundation of service. Seeing that foundation begin to crack was a personal blow. "A fish rots from the head, they say," Preston murmured, more to himself than to Lena. "But sometimes the head is the last to know the body is sick." "I can read reports all day, Lena. I can send out 100 memos about our commitment to excellence. But those are just words. I need to see it. I need to feel it." The decision crystallized in his mind, sharp and clear. He turned back to her. "I'm going to fly." Lena looked puzzled. "Sir, your jet is on standby. Where do you need to go?" "No," Preston said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Not my jet. One of ours. Book me a ticket on a random domestic flight for tomorrow. Coach class, middle of the week, middle of the day. Use a different name. No perks. No flags on the account. No special treatment. I want to be a ghost." Understanding dawned on Lena's face. She knew better than to question his methods. Preston's instincts were the bedrock upon which the entire multi-billion-dollar corporation was built. "Yes, sir. I'll handle it immediately." The transformation was quiet and methodical. That evening at his home, Preston Cole, the billionaire, began to disappear. He went to his closet, walking past rows of hand-tailored suits and bespoke shoes. He reached into the back and pulled out a simple polo shirt he hadn't worn in years. He found a pair of old, comfortable jeans. Then came the most symbolic act. He unclasped the heavy gold Patek Philippe watch from his wrist, a piece worth more than most cars, and placed it carefully in a drawer. In its place, he wore nothing. Finally, he swapped his polished Italian loafers for a pair of worn-out sneakers. The very ones Sabrina would later judge with such disdain. He packed a simple, unbranded duffel bag with a book and a change of clothes. Looking at himself in the mirror, he was no longer Preston Cole. He was just a man. An older man, traveling alone. Anonymous. Now, as Flight 7681 continued its journey westward, the irony was a palpable thing. The whispers had died down, replaced by the mundane sounds of a long-haul flight. The passenger next to him, a young student with headphones on, was oblivious, lost in the world of a movie. The man who had smirked was now asleep, his head lolling to one side. They were all sharing this metal tube, hurtling through the stratosphere, completely unaware that the most powerful man in the room was the one sitting in the cheap seats, the one who had been so easily and publicly dismissed. Preston Cole felt the slight vibration of the airframe, a feeling he knew intimately. But for the first time in a long time, he was feeling it not as an owner, but as a passenger who had just been shown the unvarnished, ugly truth of his own creation, and he knew, with absolute certainty, what he had to do about it. Back in the gleaming Ascendair Tower, Lena was not looking at quarterly reports anymore. She was looking at a single personnel file, and her expression was grim. The name on the screen was Sabrina Knox. Preston's text message had been brief and devoid of detail, but Lena understood the underlying command perfectly. Full log was code. It meant he had seen something that required a deep dive. He was on the hunt, and she was his lead scout. She started with the official records. Sabrina Knox, 33 years old, employed with Ascendair for 8 years. Promoted to senior flight attendant 2 years ago. On the surface, her record was clean. Her performance reviews, signed off by her direct supervisors, were filled with satisfactory marks and generic praise. Efficient. Knowledgeable of protocols. Maintains a professional appearance. But Lena knew that the official record was often a carefully curated fiction. The real story was usually buried deeper. She accessed the internal complaint database, a system separate from the public-facing customer service portal. This was where employees could file reports about their colleagues. She cross-referenced Sabrina's name, and the screen began to populate with flags. Red flags. It was worse than she had expected. The file painted a picture, not of a model employee, but of a petty tyrant who had mastered the art of manipulating the system. There were multiple warnings from HR that had apparently gone unheeded, buried under layers of procedural paperwork. Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard, opening the files one by one. Each one told a small, ugly story. Complaint 1, filed by a junior attendant a year ago. Sabrina Knox publicly berated me in front of passengers for being too slow with the beverage cart. When I tried to apologize, she told me, "People like you don't last long here." Sabrina's official response. The junior attendant was flustered and emotional. I was providing firm, necessary guidance during a busy service. The complaint was dismissed. Complaint 2, filed by a passenger 8 months ago. I am an elderly man, and I asked for help placing my bag in the overhead bin. The flight attendant, S. Knox, rolled her eyes and told me if I couldn't handle my own luggage, I should have checked it. Another passenger had to help me. Sabrina's official report on the flight. Passenger became agitated and demanding. Followed all company protocols regarding baggage assistance. No action was taken. Complaint 3, from another coworker. Sabrina consistently makes derogatory comments about passengers in the galley, often based on their appearance or perceived social class. It creates a toxic work environment. Sabrina's rebuttal. Private galley conversations are being taken out of context. It is harmless venting among colleagues. A supervisor had given her a verbal counseling session, the bureaucratic equivalent of a slap on the wrist. The pattern was undeniable. Sabrina was a bully who targeted those she perceived as beneath her, whether they were passengers in coach or junior members of the crew. She was an expert at twisting narratives, painting her victims as the aggressors, and herself as a long-suffering professional just trying to do her job. She had survived for so long because no single complaint was explosive enough on its own, and she was skilled at ensuring her version of events was the one that made it into the official record. Lena's jaw was tight with anger. She felt a protective fury on behalf of her boss, a man she knew to be one of the kindest and most humble people she had ever met. The thought of this woman, this small-minded bigot, humiliating him, made her blood run cold. Her phone buzzed. It was another text from Preston, still in the air. He had clearly been reading the summaries she had been quietly forwarding to his secure device. This message was even shorter than the last. 2 words. It's time. Lena knew exactly what that meant. The phase of quiet observation was over. The trap was now to be set. She began to compile all the complaints, all the official reports, and all of Sabrina's self-serving rebuttals into a single comprehensive dossier. She flagged Sabrina's upcoming flight schedule, Flight 7062, Atlanta to Denver, departing the next morning. The return trip. Every move was now being calculated, timed to perfection. Sabrina Knox was flying at 37,000 feet, completely oblivious that on the ground below, the architecture of her career was being systematically dismantled, brick by damning brick. She believed she had won a small victory over a nameless, powerless man. In reality, she had just started a war with a giant, and he was about to bring the full weight of his empire down upon her. The plane finally touched down in Denver with a gentle bump, the spell of the mid-flight tension breaking as passengers began the familiar ritual of gathering their belongings. As people shuffled into the aisle, Preston remained seated, patiently waiting for the crowd to thin. Across the aisle, Miles Everett was working, his movements efficient but his eyes troubled. He kept glancing toward row 24, a silent debate raging within him. He watched as Sabrina directed the deplaning process near the forward galley, her voice once again sharp and commanding. He saw her make a dismissive gesture toward an elderly woman who was moving too slowly for her liking, fumbling with a heavy coat. "Ma'am, we need to keep the aisle clear," Sabrina said, her tone laced with the same impatience she had shown Preston. That was it. That was the final push Miles needed. The casual, reflexive cruelty of it solidified his resolve. This wasn't a one-time bad mood. This was who she was. His fear of reprisal was suddenly eclipsed by a stronger, clearer sense of duty. He waited until the last passenger had shuffled off the jet bridge, and Preston finally stood up to retrieve his simple duffel bag from the overhead compartment. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Miles walked toward him, his heart pounding against his ribs. This could be the end of his career before it had even truly begun. "Mr. Cole?" he said, his voice quiet but clear. Preston turned, his perceptive eyes meeting Miles's. There was no surprise in his expression, only a calm, waiting curiosity. The use of his real name was the point of no return. "Sir, I recognized you from the company newsletter. About halfway through the flight," Miles confessed, his words tumbling out in a rush of nervous energy. "I'm so sorry for what happened earlier. For her behavior. I didn't say anything at the time because I wasn't sure what to do, but I saw everything. And I want you to know I am willing to speak up. I will give a formal statement about everything I witnessed today. It wasn't right," he finished, his breath held, bracing for any number of reactions. Annoyance of being recognized, a dismissal of his offer. Instead, Preston Cole looked at him, and a slow, appreciative nod was his answer. The look in the older man's eyes was one of profound respect. He saw the risk Miles was taking, the courage it took for a junior employee to stand up and challenge a senior one. "You just passed your final test, son," Preston said, his voice filled with a quiet fatherly pride that instantly eased the knot of anxiety in Miles's stomach. The words landed with the weight of a benediction. Preston then reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, a simple windbreaker, and pulled out a small, crisp business card. It was stark white, with nothing on it but a name, Preston Cole, and a single phone number embossed in elegant black type. It was a card very few people in the world possessed. He handed it to Miles. "Join me tomorrow at HQ," Preston said. "9 a.m. My assistant will be waiting for you at the front desk." Miles took the card, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. It felt impossibly heavy, a tangible symbol of a crossroads in his life. He was flooded with a dizzying mix of relief, gratitude, and sheer awe. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'll be there." As Preston walked off the jet bridge, disappearing into the anonymity of the airport terminal, Miles looked down at the card again. He had chosen his side. He had spoken up, not knowing the man he was defending was the most powerful man in the company, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And somehow that single act of quiet courage had just changed the entire trajectory of his life. Sabrina Knox felt a surge of triumphant energy as she strode into the crew lounge at Denver International Airport. The flight was over, the passengers were gone, and she was back in her element. surrounded by colleagues who either feared or admired her. In her mind, the incident with the man in 24B was already being rewritten into a heroic narrative of her own making. She saw herself as the guardian of order, the enforcer of rules against a tide of increasingly demanding and entitled customers. She sat down at a terminal in the corner of the room and began to type her official flight report, a crucial piece of administrative CYA that she had perfected over the years. Under the section for notable passenger interactions, she paused, composing her words carefully. She typed, "Passenger in seat 24B became agitated after being informed of beverage service protocols. Exhibited disruptive behavior by repeatedly using the call button without cause. She conveniently omitted the fact that he had pressed it only once. Refused to follow crew instructions to remain seated. De-escalated the situation by calmly but firmly reasserting airline policy." It was a masterpiece of fiction, a version of events where she was the composed professional and he was the unruly problem. Satisfied, she submitted the report, creating an official record that would, she believed, protect her from any potential complaint. She then sauntered over to the coffee machine, where another crew member, the same one she had muttered to on the plane, was waiting. "You would not believe the guy in 24B," Sabrina began, her voice loud enough for others in the lounge to hear. "Total nightmare. I had to put him in his place. Honestly, some people just do not belong on an airplane." She poured her coffee, her movements sharp and self-satisfied. He had this look on his face, like he expected me to roll out a red carpet for him. A different flight attendant, an older woman who had been with the airline for over a decade, overheard and frowned slightly. "Really, Sabrina?" "He seemed pretty quiet from where I was sitting. I saw him when he boarded. He barely said a word." Sabrina waved her hand dismissively, a gesture of supreme arrogance. "Oh please," she scoffed. "That's how they are. Quiet until they want something. Did you see his shoes?" She leaned in conspiratorially. "He was wearing these disgusting, beat-up sneakers. He looked like a janitor pretending to be a boss. The type who thinks a $100 coach ticket makes them king for a day." The insult, so specific and so dripping with classist contempt, hung in the air. This was the core of it, the ugly truth of her prejudice. It wasn't about rules or protocols. It was about her own deep-seated need to feel superior to others. At that exact moment, Miles Everett was walking past the open door of the crew lounge on his way to collect his own luggage. He had the business card tucked safely in his shirt pocket, a secret he held close to his chest. He heard Sabrina's final damning statement clearly. He looked like a janitor pretending to be a boss. Miles stopped in the hallway, just out of sight. He didn't react. He didn't gasp. A cold, grim certainty settled over him. Any lingering doubt he might have had about the man's character, any fleeting thought that maybe he had overreacted, evaporated in that instant. He now understood the full scope of Sabrina's malice. It wasn't just a bad day, it was a corrupt character. He heard her laughter from inside the lounge, a sound that was now utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of ignorance, of arrogance, of someone so confident in her small world that she couldn't see the cliff edge she was gleefully dancing upon. Miles touched the card in his pocket. It felt like a shield. He turned and walked away, his stride now firm, his expression a mask of quiet resolve. Sabrina had doubled down on her cruelty. She had lied on an official report. She had sealed her own fate. And Miles knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he would be there to watch it happen. The next morning the sun streamed through the panoramic windows of Preston Cole's office, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the silent air. The storm was coming, but here, at its eye, there was only a profound sense of calm. Preston was not behind his massive desk. He was seated in a simple armchair, a cup of coffee held loosely in his hands. He was once again dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, the humble passenger from 24B, completely gone, replaced by the quiet titan of industry. Miles Everett had come and gone, his 9 a.m. meeting brief, respectful and affirming. The young man's testimony had been factual, heartfelt and damning. Now all the pieces were in place. Preston placed his coffee cup down on a coaster with a soft click. He reached for the phone on his side table, not his cell phone, but the secure landline that sat there, a direct link to the nerve center of his operations. He pressed a single speed dial button. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. His course was set. Miles away in the bustling, high-tech Ascendair Operations Center, that call was an event. The room was a cacophony of controlled chaos, with dozens of specialists monitoring flight paths on a wall of giant screens. The operations director, a seasoned veteran named Mark, was in the middle of his morning briefing, pointing to a weather system developing over the Rockies. Suddenly, the small red light on his private console began to flash. It was a line that only a handful of people had the number for. He saw the name on the small display, P. Cole. Mark's posture straightened instantly. He excused himself from the briefing with a raised hand and walked to his soundproofed office, closing the door behind him. He picked up the receiver. "Yes, Mr. Cole?" Preston's voice on the other end was perfectly level, almost unnervingly calm. It was a voice that did not brook argument or questions. It simply stated reality as it was now going to be. "Mark," Preston began, "I need you to turn Flight 7. Mark froze. His mind, accustomed to dealing with 1,000 logistical variables a minute, went blank for a split second. Flight 7262 was the Denver to Atlanta route. It was already in the air, probably somewhere over Kansas by now. Turning a flight around was a measure of last resort for a critical medical emergency, a security threat, a catastrophic mechanical failure. It would cost a fortune in fuel, disrupt the schedules of over 100 passengers, and create a PR nightmare. "Sir?" Mark asked, his voice tight, needing to ensure he had heard correctly. "You heard me," Preston continued, his tone unchanged. "Turn Flight 762 around and have it land back in Atlanta. I want corporate security to meet the flight at the gate. A senior flight attendant, Sabrina Knox, is to be escorted off the aircraft the moment the doors open. Ensure the entire interaction at the gate is recorded." The sheer breathtaking audacity of the command left Mark speechless. He was being ordered to disrupt a major flight operation not for a safety issue, but to remove a single employee. The level of authority required to make such a call was absolute. This was not a request, it was a royal decree. Mark's mind raced, but his mouth formed the only possible response. "Yes, Mr. Cole." "Thank you, Mark," Preston said, and the line went dead. The call had lasted less than 30 seconds. There had been no yelling, no threats, no explanation, just a calm, quiet, and utterly immovable instruction. Mark stood in his office for a moment, the dead receiver still pressed to his ear. The silence on the other end of the line was more powerful than any shouting could ever be. He then walked out of his office, his face a grim mask, and began issuing the orders that would send a shockwave through the entire system. An unprecedented command that would freeze the tower and send a single targeted aircraft turning back in mid-air. Back in his sunlit office, Preston Cole picked up his coffee cup. He took a slow, deliberate sip, the taste rich and dark on his tongue. He looked out the window at the city below, a peaceful expression on his face. The gears of consequence were now grinding, and justice, in his view, was finally on its final approach. Aboard Flight 7062, somewhere over the vast plains of Kansas, Sabrina Knox was performing her duties with her usual air of detached authority. She was in her kingdom, a metal tube in the sky where her word was law. The passengers were settled, the drink service was complete, and the flight to Atlanta was proceeding smoothly. She felt a sense of satisfaction. The disruptive passenger from yesterday was a distant memory, a problem she had efficiently solved and documented. The day stretched before her, predictable and controlled. Then, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and professional, but with an undercurrent of something that pricked at the edges of Sabrina's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, a quick update from the flight deck. Due to an unforeseen operational issue, we are being rerouted by our operations center. We will be turning back and returning to Atlanta." A collective murmur went through the cabin. Confusion. Annoyance. Passengers looked at each other, wondering what could possibly be wrong. An operational issue? Was it the engine? The weather? Sabrina was instantly furious. This was an outrage. A diversion would ruin her schedule, delay her layover, and create a mountain of paperwork. Her immediate instinct was to march to the cockpit and demand a full explanation, a severe breach of protocol that she felt entitled to make. But just as she was about to unbuckle her jump seat, the small light on the crew intercom system flashed. It was a message from the cockpit. She picked up the receiver. It was the co-pilot. His voice was clipped and formal. "Sabrina, return to your station and prepare the cabin for landing." That's a direct order from the captain. "What is the operational issue?" she demanded. There was a brief pause. "That information is on a need-to-know basis," the co-pilot said, his voice now cold. "You do not need to know. Secure the cabin." The line went dead. What Sabrina couldn't see was the message that had flashed across the cockpit's main communication screen just moments earlier, a direct text uplink from the Ascendair Operations Center in Atlanta. It read, "ATN, Flight 726. Executive Command divert. Sabrina Knox is the operational issue. Do not inform her of the reason for divert. Repeat. Do not inform. Comply immediately." The captain and co-pilot had exchanged a wide-eyed, silent look of disbelief. They had never seen a message like it in their combined 30 years of flying. Stung and bewildered, Sabrina returned to her duties, her mind racing. This was personal. She could feel it. This had to be about something more than a mechanical fault. As the plane banked in a wide, graceful arc, turning back east, she felt a growing sense of dread, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. When the plane finally landed back in Atlanta, the atmosphere was thick with an unnatural tension. As they taxied toward the gate, Sabrina peered out a window and saw something that made the blood drain from her face. Waiting on the jet bridge, standing with an impassive airport official, were two uniformed security guards from Ascendair's corporate division. They were not TSA. They were internal security, and they were looking right at the plane. The moment the engines spooled down and the seatbelt sign pinged off, the captain emerged from the cockpit. He didn't look at Sabrina. He walked directly to the main cabin door as the ground crew connected the jet bridge. The airport official waiting outside stepped forward and handed the captain a single sealed white envelope. The captain tore it open. As he read the single sheet of paper inside, his professional composure vanished. The color drained from his face, replaced by a pale, shocked pallor. He looked up, and his eyes finally fell on Sabrina. His expression was no longer one of a colleague. It was cold, distant, and filled with a sudden, dawning comprehension. He walked back to where she stood, frozen by her jump seat. "Sabrina Knox," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You are to deboard immediately. Come with me." Her voice, usually so sharp and commanding, was now a high, thin whisper. "Why? What is this about? What have I done?" The captain didn't answer. He simply gestured for her to walk ahead of him. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the security guards moved to flank her. The official stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his tone polite but unyielding. "You have been flagged by executive command. Please come with us." The phrase executive command echoed in the narrow space, a pronouncement of a power so far above her it was like being struck by lightning from a clear blue sky. The walk through the terminal was a blur of humiliation. Flanked by security, Sabrina was escorted not to a small windowless HR office in the airport basement, but directly to a black car waiting on the tarmac. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion and fury. This had to be a mistake, a colossal, insane misunderstanding. Maybe it was about her flight report. Maybe that passenger had filed a complaint after all. She would handle it. She would talk her way out of it, just as she always had. She would explain, manipulate and project blame until she was vindicated. She was driven directly to the Ascendair Tower, the gleaming monument to the company she worked for. The security guards led her up the elevator, the ride silent and tense. They didn't stop at the human resources floor. They went all the way to the top, to the executive wing. They stopped outside the main boardroom, a set of imposing oak doors she had only ever seen in company promotional videos. One of the guards opened a door and gestured for her to enter. Still simmering with righteous indignation, Sabrina stormed into the room, ready to demand an explanation, ready to confront whoever was responsible for this farce. And then she froze. The room was vast, dominated by a long, polished table that reflected the city lights, like a dark mirror, and seated around that table were the most powerful people in the entire corporation. The stern-faced head of human resources, the director of flight operations, several members of the company's board of directors, their faces grim and unreadable. And there, at the very head of the table, in the seat of ultimate power, sat a man she recognized with a gut-wrenching, soul-crushing wave of nausea. He was dressed in a sharp, dark suit that probably cost more than her car. His posture was one of absolute, relaxed authority. The light from the window caught the dignified lines of his face. It was the man from seat. The connection was instantaneous and catastrophic, a fusion reaction in her brain that vaporized every ounce of her anger and replaced it with pure, cold, liquid terror. Her world tilted on its axis. The janitor pretending to be a boss. The man in the beat-up sneakers, the quiet, humiliated passenger. It was him. Her mouth went dry. Her carefully constructed reality shattered into a million pieces. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. Her mouth opened, but the commanding voice she was so proud of was gone. Only a single horrified whisper escaped. "You." Preston Cole did not answer her. He didn't need to. He simply looked at her, his expression not one of anger or triumph, but of deep, profound disappointment. He picked up a small remote control from the table and pointed it at the massive presentation screen on the wall. The screen flickered to life, and her own voice filled the dead silent boardroom, loud and mocking. Captured by the galley's security camera. "He probably thinks he's important," her recorded voice sneered. He shut up real quick after that. The board members watched, their faces like stone. Then another file appeared on the screen. It was the official complaint from the elderly man she had refused to help with his luggage 8 months ago. Then another clip. This one audio only, from a junior colleague's formal report about her bullying. One by one, the sins of her career, the complaint she had dismissed and buried, were resurrected and laid bare for the company's entire leadership to see. When the presentation of evidence was complete, Preston gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the boardroom door. It opened, and Miles Everett walked in. He was dressed in a simple suit, his expression nervous but resolute. He did not look at Sabrina. He looked directly at Preston and the board. "I was the junior flight attendant on Flight 7061 yesterday," Miles began, his voice clear and steady. He then proceeded to give a calm, factual, and utterly devastating account of everything he had witnessed. He described Preston's polite request for water. He repeated Sabrina's loud, humiliating response. He recounted her bragging in the galley, her lies, her mockery of Preston's appearance, and her dismissive attitude toward the other elderly passenger during deplaning. He presented the truth, simply and without embellishment. When Miles finished and had been quietly excused from the room, a heavy silence fell. Preston Cole slowly scanned the faces of his leadership team. "The evidence is clear," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "The pattern of behavior is undeniable and unacceptable. It violates every principle this company was built on. The floor is now open for a vote on the immediate termination of Sabrina Knox's employment. For cause." One by one, hands went up around the polished table. The head of HR, the director of operations, every single board member. It was swift, silent, and unanimous. Sabrina finally found her voice, a desperate, pleading sound she didn't recognize as her own. "Please," she stammered. "This is a misunderstanding. I can explain. I was having a bad day. I'm sorry." Preston held up a single hand, and the torrent of excuses died in her throat. "There is no misunderstanding, Ms. Knox," he said, his voice laced with a cold finality. "There is only a record of disrespect, of arrogance, and of cruelty. It is a record that ends today. Apology not accepted." As if on cue, the 2 security guards who had been waiting silently outside the door stepped into the room. They moved to stand on either side of her. Her career at Ascendair, the source of her pride and her power, was over. It had been dismantled in a silent, methodical ambush from which there was no escape and no appeal. The story of Flight 7062's unprecedented mid-air reversal did not stay quiet for long. Ascendair's communications department released a carefully worded statement about a flight diversion required to address a personnel issue and uphold the company's core standards of customer service. The deliberate vagueness of the statement acted like gasoline on a fire. Journalists and industry bloggers began digging, and soon, anonymous sources from within the company leaked the unbelievable truth. The headline that emerged was electric. Ascendair CEO, flying incognito in coach, orders plane to turn around to fire disrespectful flight attendant. It went viral almost instantly. On social media, the story exploded. Ascendair, Preston Cole and Flight 76-2 became the top trending topics in the world. The narrative was irresistible, a powerful, humble billionaire leader taking decisive, dramatic action to enforce a culture of respect. People shared the story with fervent approval. "This is what leadership looks like," one tweet read. "Finally, some real accountability for terrible customer service," another user posted. Soon Sabrina's name began to trend as well, but for all the wrong reasons. It appeared alongside hashtags like Karen, entitled, and fired. The public narrative painted her as the villain in a modern-day morality play, and then the floodgates opened. Empowered by the news, former passengers and colleagues who had suffered her abuse for years felt safe to come forward. Twitter and Facebook lit up with their stories. A woman posted, "That's the same flight attendant who made my mother cry when she asked for a pillow." A former junior attendant wrote a long post detailing the toxic, bullying environment Sabrina created. Each new story was a fresh log on the fire of public outrage, confirming the pattern that Preston's team had uncovered. Her reputation was being publicly and permanently dismantled. In stark contrast, another name began to emerge in the press coverage: Miles Everett. He was identified as the brave junior attendant who spoke up for what was right. He was hailed as a hero, a symbol of integrity. In a brilliant PR move, Ascendair released a follow-up statement announcing Miles's immediate promotion to a newly created position, corporate flight ambassador. His new role, the statement said, would involve him working directly with the executive team to develop and implement new training programs focused on passenger dignity and employee integrity. The story of Preston Cole's quiet mission and its dramatic conclusion resonated deeply with the public. His office was inundated with thousands of emails and letters. They came from frequent flyers, from other airline employees, from business leaders, and from ordinary people who had felt the sting of being treated poorly by someone in a position of petty power. They didn't just congratulate him, they thanked him. "Thank you for reminding the world that how you treat people matters," one letter read. "As a long-time customer, my faith in your airline has been fully restored," said another. Preston hadn't just fired a problematic employee. He had made a powerful public declaration about the soul of his company, and in doing so, had earned a level of customer loyalty that no marketing campaign could ever buy. A few days after the media storm had begun to subside, Miles Everett received a summons. He was asked to meet Preston Cole, not in the imposing boardroom, but in his personal office. The atmosphere this time was different. It was calm, informal, and deeply personal. Preston was standing by the window, looking down at the city, when Miles was shown in. "Miles, come in," Preston said, turning with a warm smile. "Please, have a seat." Miles sat in one of the chairs opposite Preston's desk, his back straight, still feeling a sense of profound awe in the man's presence. Preston sat not behind his desk, but in the other chair, creating a sense of equality and intimacy. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What you did on that plane, and in that boardroom, it took a tremendous amount of courage," he began, his voice low and sincere. "It's easy to go along to get along. It's easy to look the other way. It's hard to stand up, especially when you think you're standing alone." He gestured toward the vast window. "I built all of this," he said, his gaze sweeping across the skyline. "I started with nothing but an idea. But all of these buildings, all of these planes, they're just metal and glass. They mean nothing if the people we serve, every single one of them, aren't treated with basic human dignity. You reminded me, and you reminded my entire executive team, of a lesson that is easy to forget in a room like this. That justice doesn't always wear a suit and tie. Sometimes it wears a junior flight attendant's uniform." Preston paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet room. "I've been looking at your file, Miles. Your performance reviews are excellent. Your attitude is exactly what we should be looking for. I also saw the notation that you have aspirations to become a pilot." Preston reached over to his desk and slid a thick, handsome folder across the polished wood toward Miles. "Ascendair would be honored to offer you a full scholarship to the top aviation academy in the country. Your salary as corporate flight ambassador will continue while you are in school, all expenses paid. And when you graduate, there will be a first officer position waiting for you on one of our newest aircraft." Miles stared at the folder, his mind unable to process the words. He slowly reached out and touched it, as if to confirm it was real. This was his dream. A dream he thought was decades away. A mountain too high to climb on his own. He looked up at Preston, his eyes shining with unshed tears. His throat was thick with emotion. "Sir," he managed to say. His voice choked. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Just thank you." A genuine fatherly smile spread across Preston's face. "You earned it, son. You don't have to thank me. Just do me one favor." He leaned forward again, his expression serious but kind. "Pass it forward. When you're sitting in that captain's seat one day, never forget what it feels like to be the passenger who feels invisible. Never forget what it feels like to be the junior crew member who is afraid to speak up. Always be the one who offers a hand. Always be the one who listens." "I will, sir," Miles said, his voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "I promise." It was more than a promotion. It was more than a scholarship. It was the beginning of a mentorship, a powerful bond forged between the humble billionaire and the courageous young man, born from a simple, profound act of decency in the sky. A month later, a man walked down the jet bridge to board another Ascendair flight. He was older, dressed in a simple polo shirt and comfortable, worn sneakers. He carried a plain duffel bag. He found his seat, 24B, and settled in by the window. It was Preston Cole on another unannounced inspection. But this time, something was different. The atmosphere in the cabin was palpably lighter. The flight attendant standing at the door didn't just offer the rote, plastic greeting of a corporate script. She made eye contact with every single passenger. She smiled a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "We're happy to have you with us today." As the passengers settled in, Preston watched. He saw a young flight attendant, no older than Miles, patiently helping a family struggling to fold up their stroller. He saw the lead attendant notice an elderly man shivering slightly and preemptively offer him a blanket and a pillow, without being asked. The service was attentive, it was kind, it was respectful, it was human. The name Sabrina Knox was never mentioned. Her firing was already old news, a cautionary tale that had been absorbed into the company's institutional memory. Her absence was never noted, but the lesson she had inadvertently taught lingered in the air of every flight. The message had been received, not through a memo, but through a decisive, dramatic action that every employee now understood. The standard was not just a suggestion, it was the law of the land at Ascendair. Preston looked out the window as the plane pushed back from the gate. He saw the ground crew give the pilot a thumbs up. He felt a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. This was the company he had envisioned all those years ago. This was the legacy he wanted to build. The mission was not just about punishing the guilty. It was about inspiring the good. He leaned his head back against the seat, a peaceful expression on his face as the engines roared to life. His work was not done, but it was on the right course. True power doesn't raise its voice. It listens. It doesn't need to announce its presence with arrogance or fanfare. It demonstrates its strength through its values. True power observes the world with quiet patience, and when the time for talk is over, when the moment for a lesson arrives, it speaks with action. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.